Right, there we go. So close your eyes, bring your attention into the present moment. And just that little suggestion, bring your attention into the present moment. You'll notice the silence of presence, so the silence of knowing how things are. And this silent knowing is what we're trying to cultivate. So it's more like an attitude rather than experience, an attitude of listening, an attitude of being receptive. So, and don't emphasize the quality of sound, but emphasize no matter what sound you are experiencing, be it loud or almost non-existent, the listening is what we're emphasizing, or the knowing. And notice the silence there, the silence of awareness. Notice also that there is no striving to get some particular experience. So it's the point of non-desire. Non-desires are peaceful. We don't know, but we're sort of caught up with desire attachments. So listen to sound. Changing the sound. And be that silent knowing. Nowhere to go, nothing to become. Let the feelings the awareness knows the lips, and the lips have some kind of feeling, sensation to them. Let that be conscious. That's important. So this isn't like a hard focus. It's a receptive awareness. Go inside your mouth, feel your teeth and gums. Let that be conscious as feeling, not as concept. And be the silent knowing. Tongue. Let the tongue be feeling, sensation. And then the inside the mouth, the left and right cheek, the roof of the mouth and the floor of the mouth. So that whole area, allow it to be conscious. Again, we're not looking for some sensation, we're just practicing silent knowing of what we're experiencing. So it's the silent knowing that we're stressing, really. And the body settle into the moment. Bring attention to your ears, the outer structures of the ears. Let that be known. So some things are very strong. Some are almost non-existent. It's all right. Be the silent knowing. Inside the ear canals. Sensations of the nose, the bridge of the nose. Now, when you that, do you squeeze your eyes trying to see something? So that's not necessary. Just let the feelings manifest. And it's the silent knowing. The nostrils, closure with the body, collectedness. Now the eyes are held in tension quite often. So imagine that the orbits of your eyes get bigger and bigger and expand outwards. So feel the orbits, the cavities of the eyes, and imagine them expanding. And notice how that works on your head. And even the brain. So the orbit's expanding. Go back to the eyes themselves. And imagine the eyes are just sort of dropping out of your head in like a total relax. So those two things. Notice how that affects your temples, forehead. And let your attention rest at the back of your head. And now perceive the head as in awareness rather than you, the head. Awareness knows. The head feels this way. Eyes relaxed. So we're cultivating an awareness of the body as a phenomenon in nature rather than some. Go through the torso, feel your neck. Let the neck be feeling right side, left side. Feel the right shoulder. Let that be sensation. Upper arm, right arm, lower arm, hand. So that whole mass of sensations in awareness. Feel left arm, left shoulder, upper arm down to the head. Silent knowing. Both arms together. Stay with this, stay in the present moment. Bring attention to your torso. Feel the sensations of clothing on the body. Let that be conscious. Pose. Side, chest area, feel the ribs, the lungs, heart. So you don't have to look for the organs, they're just suggestions. So you're not really looking looking for something. You're aware of what is. The emphasis is on silence. Fine. Go down, feel the lower spine. Feel the abdominal area. And this is in awareness. The body is in awareness. Pelvic area, feel the pelvic bones. The weight of the body on your cushion. And the pelvic organs. Silent knowing. Feel the left hip. Foot. Feel that whole area. And feel the right hip, right thigh, knee and lower leg, foot. Now bring it all together. Feel both legs, pelvis, abdominal, upper torso, chest area, shoulders and arms, neck, back of the head, face, the whole head. Now step back and witness the whole body as changing sensation in awareness. So the perception is that the body is in awareness. And this requires a sense of that awareness is spacious. And to heighten that perception, move to another sense base, listen to sound. So the sound might have the perception that it's out there, which is true. But that perception of distance and space is in awareness. So sound is in awareness. And awareness has no limits. It contains, it allows. And then back to the body. And the body is in awareness. It's the same awareness. Awareness of sound, is that any different to awareness of the body? The object is different, the awareness is the same. So we say, be that unchanging knowing or awareness. Be aware. So what this hopefully does is brings you to a sense of awareness as being receptive and open, rather than the idea of controlling. Not that the control is wrong. So awareness isn't something you try to get, it's something you notice that's always there. So now take this attitude of open attention, open awareness, and apply it to the breathing. Feel an in-breath, and feel an out-breath. And sustain this attitude of openness, receptivity, one breath at a time. So this is a way of composing the kind of scattered mind with a sensation of breathing. And if you start to focus really strongly, then your eyes will get tight and there'll be pressure. See if you can notice that if that's happening, and then relax the eyes and come back to receptive awareness. And just trust in that and see what happens. Okay, that's a lot of instruction, so I'll be quiet for the rest of the sitting and you experiment in your own way. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma buddhang dhammang sanghang namissami. So my apologies for this poor internet, but I can't do much. We're out in the country. We're country folk, so can't know what I'm saying. We had some visitors from Temple Monastery near Boston. A big branch monastery. Ajahn Janto is the abbot. And we had 3 of the monks came to visit us. And this morning we were talking about dogma, eclecticism, and the tendency sometimes for traditions to be very sectarian on one hand and reject other traditions. But the opposite of that is then to have no real foundation and be so eclectic that the mind can be kind of inspired by things but have no real grounding intellectually. So on the one hand, you have eclecticism, or a sort of accept all philosophies no matter what. On the other hand, you have dogmatism and some way in between. The important thing really is, I think, contemplation. That whatever teaching we take, it's a reflective teaching, a contemplative teaching, not just a belief system. And so if one is so eclectic that one has not really studied any tradition or invested any time in understanding its intellectual basis, then you won't have the intellectual equipment and foundation and confidence, I would say, to actually look at other traditions. So I've studied Theravada Buddhism, and I've put a lot into practicing those principles. But because my life is contemplative rather than dogmatic, I can look at Sufism, or I can look at Advaita Vedanta, or I can look at Thomas Merton, and I can consider different voice with different language. But what is this person actually saying? So like the word God, Theravada Buddhism doesn't use that. So if someone uses the word God, do I just dismiss it and say, we don't do God? We're godless? That would be, I think, unintelligent. First thing I'd have to do is ask the person, well, what do you mean by God? You know, what does that refer to? And then I could look in my own practice and my own structures of understanding. I could say, well, no, I don't see that. And I could dialogue some more. And I could and this is your sense of it, of the spiritual life. And I said, my system? No, I don't. I disagree with you. But the disagreement would come from my experience, not just my dogma. And it could be quite kind. I don't have to disagree in an unkind way. So dogmatism is a trap, but also eclecticism, it's a trap when you don't really have an intellectual foundation. And so in Theravada Buddhism, we have these foundations of study, and I don't go into those because there's lots of books about that. But if you like the Theravada TV community, then I would say if you want confidence in this tradition, you should have a good grounding in the Four Noble Truths, and then use that as a contemplative vehicle for understanding suffering and the end of suffering, the way the Buddha puts it. And if you use that, then other suggestions about liberation or God or whatever you want can come within that framework. But if one were to say that enlightenment only takes place in Theravada Buddhism or only in Buddhism, that would be wrong too. So it's not dismissing, but it's having some sense of not being so wishy-washy with say that we're all one and it's all the same. Well, it's not. So someone said to me that that a jihad went to war will be reborn in heaven. I said, well, I don't think so. I think you'll have PTSD or be dead. It's different. So our Buddhism is very much based on how consciousness evolves, how the stream of consciousness is affected by events and the understanding of that. And what's very fundamental is obviously a good moral life. Because if we live a good ethical life with integrity and so on, that gives us a lot of confidence. So you notice these Theravada gatherings that we have, they always begin in the same way. So Eleanor did the homage, asked for the precepts, paid homage to the Buddha. And these rituals, they come from, but when you use them a lot, they give you a sense of inner confidence. Here is stability. Here is home ground. Here is the reliable. If you use them, you don't have to use them, but they very much become that. And I've often spoken about people who have a tradition of ritual, maybe a Christian prayer or Buddhist. I'm obviously very familiar with Buddhist chanting, but if I've gone to hospice where someone is in their last days, I don't do it that often, but so many times I've come into the room, the person has a few days to live and they seem to be kind of conscious, kind of not conscious. And maybe sometimes it looks like they're troubled, their face might be tight. And then I'll just do the chanting, the Theravada chanting that we use. And all the time people relate to that chanting in a kind of intuitive, spiritual, heartfelt way, and they relax. Your face relaxes. No, it's not a panacea for pain. You still take morphine and so on. But there are ways of freedom, which aren't just about thought. So having an intellectual structure is good, but also having some devotional practices, something that a picture. So we have all our devotional icons in a monastery. We have Buddha images, we have pictures of our teachers. I have a picture of my mom where I light a candle all the time. I have a lit candle. So there's all kinds of ways that all traditions have developed that intuitively bring you to a sense of well-being in the heart. We are hungry. So I don't know how you do that yourselves, but you wouldn't want to leave Theravada Buddhism as just an intellectual pursuit. The thing about, like, I trained early in Thailand, and the the people in the Isan and all of Thailand where I live, there's a tremendous kind of devotional quality to their Buddhism, but also quite a rigorous attitude in meditation and keeping the precepts. But when I came to the West, I saw this and very much translated from a kind of Protestant idea, very dry, no imagery. Don't give me any Buddhas, just give me the Buddha's word, give it to me straight. That kind of attitude. And that is a kind of a shame. I don't know how one brings in those heartfelt qualities of devotion. I think in Western culture, it comes to family, grandkids, taking care of your parents. But that's a very, very important part, so that it doesn't just become sort of analytical brain stuff. So we have intellect, we have heart. And then we have transcendence. So what might transcendence be? Is that a word that you have a word for that in your own religious vocabulary? So the Theravada vocabulary has Nibbana, which is the popular word, which has become so popular that I think it's just not even useful anymore. Because Nibbana sort of, in popular culture to me, implies, like a condo in heaven, something. What is heaven? I don't know. It's a place in Florida. I'm not sure, but it has a kind of imagery of being a place that you go to. I want to go to Nibbana. I don't want to go to the East End of Toronto or wherever you don't want to go. But that imagery is, of course, false, because the transcendent couldn't be a place you go to, because that would be functioning in time, and there would be a sense of self and ego going somewhere to become something and all that. That's not transcendent. That's just, hopefully you'll end up in your condo in heaven. That's still ego. That's still the way the ego works. And all condos are actually, even in heaven, you still have to pay the condo fees, and the roof still leaks. So the imagery of self and time and becoming and place is not transcendent imagery. So the imagery that the Buddha uses is actually not imagery that we use in Theravada. It's a very strange kind of language. And I use it a lot. Luang Por uses it a lot. There is the unconditioned. There is the uncreated. There is the unborn. There is the unoriginated. There is the deathless. Now, I know a lot of people, when I say this, over, oh, here he goes again. But actually, the function of Theravada Buddhism is that realization. In Christian terminology, you have the word God, and in the Abrahamic, all three Abrahamic traditions, they use the word God. When you talk to a mystic Christian writings, that word God is used in all kinds of ways. So one of the ways of talking about that of the Buddha's realization, again, that realization, that highest realization, is based on good living, good ethics, good family life, responsible family life, a heart which is in generosity, on impulses which are harmful, a life which is also restrained in terms of distraction. So one of the things I was suggesting on this meditation is stillness, quietness, stillness. Very hard to access, isn't it? If we observe our inner workings, it's blah, 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 talk, 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 thought, 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 thought. Very much isn't so much. It's just the habits of thought, the habits of thinking. And if they're driven by a strong emotional occurrence, they might be thoughts of worry, or thoughts of revenge, or thoughts of self-disparagement. So all that preoccupation, the drivenness of thought, transcendently, And so the words that I find very helpful around that, well, the words you find in Theravada Buddhism are in translations are attachment and non-attachment. And that different people look at that differently. One way to look at that is preoccupation and availability. Now, if my mind has been stimulated by some event which triggers the habit of worry, what happens? Worry comes out as an object, a feeling, and worry how long? Then that worry stimulates thought, correct? And then thought becomes my preoccupation. What am I going to do? What's going to happen? Maybe this will happen. Maybe that will happen. So in that, there's no transcendence, obviously. There is word and there's self and all of that. So as meditators, sometimes we try to get rid of thought, which doesn't work either, because that's still a preoccupation. So what we do in Buddhist meditation is do exercises to bring us back to the silence of knowing. To bring us back to that, because it's always there. The silence of knowing is always there if we become available to it. So making some investment in cultivating the silence of knowing is terribly important, and hence we meditate. And like if you're going to develop meditation, you have to see that it's not necessarily pleasant. So peace is actually boring. You notice that. As soon as your mind gets peaceful, what happens? You look at the internet, or and to sustain a peaceful mind is actually rather difficult, because it's not interesting in the same way that a good movie is, or a cup of tea, or a nice chat with a friend, or a frightening experience, because they draw your attention. But your attention, as long as it's drawn outside into experience, is not available to transcendent knowing. It's not available to the unconditioned, because it's always caught up with the conditions, with the love and the hate and the physical disabilities and the arguments and the exciting things and the boring things. Attention is preoccupied. So in this meditation, when I ask you, just listen to sound, and don't make the sound, make the listening the important thing. That's the movement to transcendence. The movement towards the quality of sound is the necessary part of living. So if I hear an explosion out in the field, then I have to pay attention to that and see, why is there an explosion? What's going on? I need to take care of that. So most of our life is lived that way, paying attention to the sense experience. It's also driven by desire. I want comfort. I don't want discomfort. So it's driven by the quality habit. When you start to question, and you start to question aware, you start to be interested in awareness itself rather than the objective experience in awareness. I would say that's the movement of spirituality. That's the movement of transcendence. If you want to use the God word, that's the movement towards God. Not God as a person, but in a kind of mystical way. But I don't tend to use that word in my own vocabulary, my own structures. I listen to sound. I emphasize the silence of no. Now, how long is that possible to do? It's actually very difficult to do it for long periods of time. But once you get the taste for that, you can then apply that to say, if the emotion of worry comes up, and preoccupation, what would those words mean in the terms of the habit of worry? Well, it would mean that you could notice worry as an object and emphasize the silent knowing. You'd be available, you'd be there, you know what's going on. But habit, the worry would come up, you wouldn't be aware of it. The habit would take you into thought, and you'd start thinking worrying thoughts. So the worry is not the problem. The worry is not the attachment. The worry is the habit. Resentment is the habit. The self-disparagement is the habit. The distraction is the habit. So it's the way thought grasps this, and we get caught up with thought, is what we mean by attachment, or in this case, preoccupation. So by doing exercises in very neutral kind of situation like sound or simple bodily feeling, not painful bodily, just simple bodily feeling, you and emphasizing the silence of knowing, you begin to taste that, you begin to abide as that, you begin to be available. Because in the silence of knowing, there is availability. The sound is the sound, and there is the listening. And if something else happens, if an emotion of fear comes up, that the silent knowing knows fear. It knows what it's like. So it's abiding as the silent witness, or as silent knowing, which is the primary practice of opening to the transcendent. Now, the transcendent might not be important to you, but what are your options? Like, we're all getting older, and some of us are even more older than that. And so it's not going to get better, right? So we do as much as we can, go to the clinic, take our pills and get our injections and all the rest of it. But the body's, we all know, it's not a refuge. It's not transcendent. The body is an earth element. It goes its own way. But this silent knowing, is that a bodily function? And so the suggestion around body meditation that I made is that can you like play around with the perception that I am in the body? Is that a true perception? Is there another perception that you could play with? So the suggestion that the body is in awareness. Now that if you're kind of into concepts and intellect, you could argue that that's not true. That can't be true. But this isn't an intellectual, conceptual argument. It's an attempt to consider other perceptions. So what happens if you do that? Would be like you notice the body in awareness. Then you're starting to go back to the silent knowing. What if you consider that the silent knowing is not bounded by the room, and that includes everything? Then you start to include space. And by including space and being as the silent knowing and watching things arise and pass away, you are inclining towards the transcendent, to the realization of Nibbana, if you will, or the unconditioned or the uncreated. Now, in itself, in the beginning, the silent knowing doesn't seem like much. Like if you just listen, how long can you just listen to neutral sounds? Your mind will pick up the habit, I want something. And so the primary part of the Four Noble Truths is a study of desire. And why do we study desire? Not that it's evil, and we don't want to even get rid of desire, but because desire is that which draws you to experience, which is not wrong. You can still have buttered toast and coffee in the morning, nothing wrong with it. But if that is the only thing our attention is involved in, is experience is changing all the time, we find no refuge. We might find happiness in buttered toast. Probably find Nibbana, or even in the neighborhood of Nibbana. It's just buttered toast. It's pleasant. So Nibbana is it's not a pleasant sensual experience. Now, desire seeks the pleasant and seeks to avoid the unpleasant. And one of the synonymous words for Nibbana, or the transcendent, is Nirodha. And Nirodha is the word which talks about the coolness of the mind, or the coolness of the fires of craving, or non-desire. Now, what does non-desire feel like? And that's very, if you have an agenda of getting some experience, that's still desire, that's still time. I'm trying to get somewhere to achieve something. Whereas non-desire, when I listen to sound and I say non-desire, that's inclining me towards a transcendent, because it's not pulling me out. Now, maybe I'm sitting here, and then maybe Rasa starts to mow the lawn, and it's loud, and I perceive that as unpleasant. It's an unpleasant sound. Why? Because I want silence. Well, I can know unpleasant. I can know, oh, this is an unpleasant sound. It feels this way. I can go out there and tell them to stop. But if I choose not to, and I focus on the sound, or the sound is unpleasant. This is the feeling of not wanting. And I just stay with the silent knowing, then the not wanting ceases and the unpleasant sound becomes neutral. We've all had that experience. If you're a meditator, you've had feelings of discomfort in the body and you choose just to witness discomfort. The discomfort feels this way. The wanting is there. You can move if you want. It's painful. You don't hurt yourself. But I think any meditator is seeing that, yeah, discomfort goes to neutrality. But the knowing didn't attach to the desire. Whereas if you're always pursuing desire, you're always just caught in the sense experience. I hear the lawnmower. I perceive the lawnmower as unpleasant. Why? Because I want silence, because I'm on the internet. I don't want that because I want this. And this is a natural pattern of life. There's nothing wrong with it. But if I only pursue that pattern, then I'm always influenced and pulled and pushed. So sometimes it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter that there's a loud sound. And I make a choice. Oh, and then I begin to witness unfulfilled desire. Now, unfulfilled desire is harder to witness because it's unpleasant. I seek the pleasant. I seek to get rid of the unpleasant. But any mature life is willing to forego short-term desire for long-term goals. Anyone who's been to university or done any kind of training in anything or had a family, one will forego short-term desires and fulfillments for long-term realizations or happiness or conclusions. That's just maturity, isn't it? So in the same way, I might feel impatient. This is a simple example, but I might feel impatient about the lawnmower, but I'm willing to forego my desires right now being fulfilled, going out there and yelling at someone. I forego that desire for the sake of non-desire, for the sake of cessation of desire, for the sake of ending of desire. And that's nibbana, or the unconditioned. So I listen, I feel the unpleasantness, I witness it. Oh, this is unpleasant. It feels this way. And it ceases, and there's the silent of knowing. And always returning to that, always returning to that. The more I return to that, I begin to sense there's a deep, deep silence in the background of all experience. It's always there. If I am willing to not be preoccupied with the foreground, I notice the background. Doesn't dismiss the need to take care of the foreground, to take care of my responsibilities, but I also see another possibility. So I do both. Try to live a good life, but also begin to notice the background of silence, silent knowing. There are many analogies of that models. One is the analogy of sky and cloud. So you have a blue sky, you have clouds. The attention is on the clouds, and then you notice the sky. Or the analogy of a book. You have the white page of the book, you have the print of the page, drama with the ideas in the print, but you don't notice the page of the book. You don't notice the white page. And that's a very good analogy for the ideas of shifting our attention from objects to the transcendent knowing. So the script or the print of the book is thought, emotion, feeling, sound, sight, relationships, ideas, programs, projects. Without rejecting that, you can also notice that within all that movement, there is the silence of non-movement, of stillness. This being refuge in Buddha, being a silent knowing. This is what we mean when we talk about Nirodha, the cessation of suffering. This is what we mean when we talk about the mind knowing the mind. That's one common there's a reading I've been using a lot in the Stillness of Flowing by Ajahn Chah. And this piece I find quite interesting because this is the chapter that describes the nuns community in Ajahn Chah's monastery. And in this paragraph, one of the senior nuns who has passed away is a very accomplished contemplative. She's just describing in the monastery. Ajahn Chah the nuns' monastery was separate from the monks' monastery, and so we did our own things. But Ajahn Chah would go to the nuns' monastery and offer teachings, and this was her comment on what he taught. When he came to give a talk, this is Ajahn Chah. When he came to give a talk, there were a lot of newly ordained nuns present. Knowing the meaning. On the intermediary level, he's training to abandon greed, hatred, delusion, attachment to views, and conceit. How to practice once our precepts were purely kept. Students, the first is like sila, or the way I'm living together with the people that I live with. And the second is about my whole emotional world, the inner world, which you could talk about like samadhi, sila samadhi. And the final bit, on the highest level, he talked about what you'd see and what you'd experience when you practiced. He talked about the purpose of becoming a nun, about the highest goal of a monastic's life. He would talk about nibbana and anatta, and there being nothing worth attaching to. Ask an older nun, the state of your mind will be at the point of death. He taught us, and this is the kind of very important sentence, he taught us to know the knowing in the knowing, not the knowing of heat and cold, of pleasure and pain, of day and night, but the knowing in the knowing. And that's very enigmatic. And that's what I think I'm trying to do when I ask you to notice the silence of knowing, because it's different than like I know that 4 and 4 equals 12, is it? No. 4 and 4 equals 8, I think it is. That's the knowing. Or the knowing that I have an appointment at the dentist tomorrow. That's the knowing of time and so on. But this is not that kind of functional, intellectual, structural knowing. It's the very sense of being, the very sense of presence. And you find these enigmatic phrases throughout Buddhism, the mind knowing the mind, knowing. What is that? Well, when I'm sitting here, if I'm preoccupied with plans about the monastery, building the new Dhamma hall and so on, that's okay. And then I know this, so I'm here now. And this to abide in that is the movement of transcendence, is the opening to transcendence. You know that you know. Now, if you've had no experience on these things, then you think it's just gobbledygook. What's he talking about? But if you start to contemplate what is really stable and reliable in human experience, is it the body? No. Is it sound? No. Is it the emotions? No. Is it relationships? No. Some things are very like living in the monastery is about as stable as you get, I think. So that's nice. I'm really appreciate it. And like during COVID, we've been pretty much the same. Our community's well, practice together, we work and all the rest of it. But it's still not a refuge. It's very helpful. I'm not dismissing that. But what's the real refuge? It's transcendent knowing. And why do we say transcendent knowing? Because it's not a knowing that's dependent on knowledge per se. Like I can hear a sound and not know what the sound is, and I can know that I don't know. I don't know what that sound is, but there is a sense of being and presence. And this presence is something that's always there, but we don't tend to notice it because we're out in the objects. So one of the phrases you might have heard me in other talks talk about that I actually have on my screensaver now is presence ever absent. I do these kinds of things and people look at me cross-eyed. Is presence ever absent? Now you might think you're absent-minded, but even in your absent-mindedness, were you ever not there? Are you ever not here? I don't want you to answer me. Yeah, I wasn't here all yesterday. I was totally lost. But is presence ever absent? And that presence or being or knowing, you find different ways of talking about that in Theravada language. So it's actually very simple if you begin to trust in the knowing moment. Just knowing. Now, if you trust in emotions, so like let's say you have some negative emotion come up. Let's say you feel lonely. A lot of people experience a lot of loneliness during COVID. Awareness. And yet people will take refuge in loneliness. They'll think lonely thoughts, negative thoughts, and then maybe do something to get rid of the loneliness. But if your refuge is in silent knowing, I know that I know. There is loneliness, it feels this way. Then it's not a threat. And it's not something you get reborn into. It's just known as an emotion that comes and goes. It might be very, very strong. Maybe you had a loss in your family, and then their loneliness is tinged with grief. Maybe you had some physical disability that came to you unwanted, obviously, and then that really threw your life around, and the confusion came. But always, always, you can know that confusion feels this way, that loneliness is like this, and then loneliness arises and ceases. It's not a threat. It's not who you are. The body is not who you are. And that inclination to see that these conditions are natural and that the knowing is like a background or a space within which things arise and cease begins to be a place of great confidence. Emotions are not a place of great confidence. So like as a teacher, I often don't know what I'm going to say. So I often feel a lack of confidence in that way. What am I like today? What am I going to say? And that in the beginning, when I began to teach so many years ago, was a very threatening kind of mindset. What am I going to say? And I said that last time, and that's attachment, preoccupation. Of course, through experience, I just know that's just a feeling of hopefully helpful, but still in the past, it was a very threatening kind of mindset. But taking refuge in knowing, well, that's just a mindset. It's not permanent or true, just the way it is. Then there's a confidence. There's a confidence within all these different things that we experience. Eleanor, you all froze on me. Did any of that get through?
No, I'm sorry, Luang Por. We missed the last few words.
May you be well and happy.
Thank you, Luang Por. Yes.
I'll do the acknowledgement, Eleanor.
Yes, thank you, Marjorie.